Today, we are telling the real story of the Titanic, not the love story, not the Hollywood version, the dark truth that the most powerful people in the world spent decades trying to bury, the cover-up that protected the wealthy, the class system that decided who lived and who died, and the 1,500 people who did not have to die but did. The Titanic was not just a ship. It was a floating monument to class inequality built from the very beginning with two completely different worlds inside it. First-class passengers lived in palatial staterooms with private promenades, a swimming pool, and dining rooms that rivaled the finest restaurants in London. 7-course meals on white Star Line china. A grand staircase under a glass dome. 3 decks below, in the hull of the same ship, third-class passengers slept in narrow metal bunks in cramped shared cabins. Simple meals on bolted-down benches. A tiny outdoor deck. And between their world and the world above them were iron gates. Locked iron gates. The same ship. 2 completely different civilizations, separated by a few flights of stairs and a padlock. The man most responsible for putting 2,224 people on that ship was J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in the world, the man who owned the White Star Line. Morgan had booked the finest suite on the ship. He canceled days before departure, citing illness. Photographs taken of him in New York after the disaster show a man in perfect health. He was never asked to explain himself at any inquiry. Nobody pressed him. Nobody dared. The ship departed Southampton on April 10, 1912, to enormous fanfare. The Titanic was not just a vessel, it was a statement. The largest moving object ever built by human hands. And crucially, unsinkable. That word appeared in promotional materials and in the press. Unsinkable. It was the word that would ultimately kill more people than the iceberg, because that belief shaped every decision made on the night of April 14th. Officers received 6 separate ice warnings throughout the day and did not slow down. Captain Smith maintained near full speed through a known ice field on a moonless night, and the White Star Line had placed only 20 lifeboats on a ship carrying 2,224 people. Combined capacity 1,178. Even if every boat launched completely full, more than half the people on board would die. That was the mathematics of the Titanic before a single iceberg appeared. At 11:40 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet spotted the iceberg and rang the warning bell. He had been scanning the darkness with his naked eyes for hours. The binocular case in the crow's nest was locked. The key had been left behind in Southampton. The men responsible for watching for exactly this danger did not have the tools to do their job. The collision lasted 10 seconds. 6 watertight compartments opened to the sea. The ship could survive 4. 6 was a death sentence. Thomas Andrews told Captain Smith the ship would sink in approximately 2 hours. There were 2,224 people on board. Lifeboat capacity for 1,178. The math was simple and it was final. What happened in the next 2 hours and 40 minutes tells you everything about the world the Titanic represented. First-class passengers were gently woken by stewards and personally escorted to the boat deck. Third-class passengers received almost nothing. Many did not speak English. The ship's layout was deliberately confusing for those unfamiliar with it, and the iron gates between third class and the upper decks were locked. Survivors testified to families gathering at locked gates with rising water behind them. These testimonies were submitted to the inquiry and largely ignored. The lifeboats tell the clearest story. Lifeboat number 1 launched with 12 people aboard. Capacity 40. Lifeboat number 6 launched with 28 people. Capacity 65. Boat after boat descended into the black water, carrying far fewer people than they could have saved. Some passengers refused to board, believing the ship was safer. Some officers launched boats before they were full, and the people trapped below in third class never made it to the deck at all. When the last lifeboat had gone, there were still over 1,500 people on the ship. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic broke apart and sank. The water was -2 degrees Celsius. Survival time was minutes. Of the 1,500 people who entered the water, only a handful were pulled out alive. Only one lifeboat went back to search for survivors. The others rowed away and waited. The numbers tell the story more clearly than any testimony. 60% of first-class passengers survived, 25% of third-class. Among first-class women, the survival rate was 97%. Among third-class men, it was 16%. The Titanic did not kill people equally. It killed poor people. It killed immigrants. It killed the people behind the locked iron gates who never made it to the deck where the boats were. Then came the cover-up. The British inquiry that followed was dominated by establishment figures with direct financial interests in the outcome. White Star Line lawyers were embedded in the proceedings. Questions about locked gates were asked briefly and dropped. Third-class survivor testimony was treated with skepticism. J. Bruce Ismay, the White Star Line chairman who stepped into a lifeboat while passengers were still on the ship, was questioned and protected. The final report blamed excessive speed and inadequate lifeboat regulations. The same regulations the Board of Trade had failed to update since 1894. Nobody was truly held responsible. Compensation paid to victims' families reflected the same hierarchy as the lifeboats. First-class estates received substantial settlements. Third-class families received amounts that barely covered their losses. Captain Lord of the SS Californian, the ship sitting 10 to 20 miles away, watching distress rockets while 1,500 people drowned, was mildly criticized and never charged. J.P. Morgan was never called to explain his cancellation, never asked whether the financial pressure he placed on the White Star Line contributed to the decision to maintain dangerous speed through an ice field. The disaster changed maritime law. Every ship built after 1912 required enough lifeboats for everyone on board. The International Ice Patrol was established, real changes that saved real lives. But the deeper questions were never answered. Why were the gates locked? Why did boats launch half empty? Why were third-class passengers left to find their own way, while first class were personally escorted to safety? The Titanic sank in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The cover-up lasted decades. We remember the ship and the iceberg and the band playing as the water rose. What we were never supposed to remember are the names on the locked gates. The 1,500 people who died not because a ship hit an iceberg, but because the world they lived in had already decided their lives were worth less than the lives of the people on the decks above them.